We are striving to forge our union with purpose, to compose a country committed to all cultures, colors, characters, and conditions of man. And so we lift our gazes not to what stands between us, but what stands before us.
Hi, I want to welcome everyone this morning to this podcast, which is being hosted by the University of Maryland School of Public Policy Alumni Board. This was conceptualized and created by a former alum, Evan Papp, and as part of the alumni boards and the school's efforts to celebrate Black History Month and to uplift and spotlight things happening in the SPP community, we wanted to take time to introduce two new professors at SPP. Both Brandi Slaughter and Ebonie CooperJean are associate clinical professors at the school. So today I wanted to take time to learn more about their work, their professional milestones, and what they're looking forward to both as professionals and mentors within the school community. My name is Delisha Thompson. I am an alum of the school. I graduated in 2018. I'm going to be both a moderator as well as painting the picture sort of just how important it is that these two new hires are here at the school and the difference it's going to make, and contrasting that as appropriate with my time at the school. So now I want to hand the mic over to Brandi so she can introduce herself first and tell our audience a little bit more about who she is and what her work entails. And then we'll go to Ebonie. So Brandi, if you don't mind, introduce yourself.
Sure. Brandi Slaughter, and I'm probably one of the newest hires to the School of Public Policy. It just started in November. And I have worked over a decade advocating for marginalized communities. I started my career working in the Ohio General Assembly, and then thereafter have lobbied for state government, lobbied for various nonprofits. But my biggest joy is advocacy for children. And so that's what I'm bringing to the school through the work of the Karabelle Pizzigati Initiative, which I am also the director of, just really helping students find a path towards being strong advocates for children, and just excited to be here.
Awesome. And Ebonie?
Yes, hi. I am also very new. Officially had this title in January. Prior to this, I served as an adjunct lecturer through the School of Public Policy, so I had some familiarity with the school and the students. My career started off actually in marketing and communications for nonprofit organizations, which then led me to learning a bit more about the gaps in the sector as it related to Black and Brown professionals, as well as organizations that serve those communities. And so teaching has always been something that I've loved. I do training and facilitation outside of this work. I'm happy to be here. I'm sure we'll talk more about it. But yeah, I'm glad to be here and continuing to learn about Maryland and the community that's here.
Awesome. Now, something that's very great and interesting about the both of you is that you both attended HBCUs for your undergraduate education. And I'm actually curious from both of you, what led you to choose to attend an HBCU? And are there any lessons from that you feel that you are going to bring to SPP students when you both formally start teaching in the fall?
I'll start. In high school, I went to a private all-girls school, an affluent school, a school that didn't have the diversity when I attended. It's much better today. I have to say that because I serve on their board now. But having participated in an experience, an all-white experience virtually. I wanted something very different for my college experience. And so I wanted a place that would nurture me, but also challenge me to be my best Black self. And so, Morgan State University in Baltimore, Maryland is where I attended. And for me, it gave me all of that. The ability to see Black excellence was just so important, particularly at that period of time where you are becoming an adult and developing and growing. You need that nurturing and support. I guess the lesson for folks from that and what I hope to bring is oftentimes we, even us, people of color, devalue our institutions. And certainly Morgan is an excellent place with an excellent education, with a beautiful campus. At the all-girls school that I went to, the expectation was that you went to an Ivy League school. That's so I kind of broke the mode a little bit. The only acceptable HBCU was Spelman. A few girls before me. I was probably about maybe the third in the whole history of the school that selected an HBCU. And for me, it was just important to nurture my soul, my spirit, my culture as I developed and grew into adulthood.
Yeah.
And Ebony?
Yes. So interestingly, Brandi, we share something else. I went to all girls school as well in New York, and in
What is up with the all-girl private school? That's what the all-girl school.
our parents thought it was
You don't know
better.
her power.
Right. Our parents thought it was better for our lives. But anyway, that's a different podcast. And the expectation there in New York is that, I will say this for a lot of us, it was pushing them towards state schools. Thankfully, I come from a long history of college educated family members. Both my parents went to HBCUs. My mom actually went to A&T, which is where I went. Aggie Pride. It has to be done. And I didn't want to go there. I was like, I don't want to do anything that my mom did. I want to chart my own path. And I went on a college tour my junior year in high school, and that was it for me. It didn't help that we had a really cute tour guide, which I share with students. But I was like, oh, if he is the standard, I am here. Yes. But my time at A&T was transformative, and I've learned that more and more in my adult life, and how my paths with classmates and schoolmates just continue to cross. And so in the classroom, and I'm here now, so I'm teaching this semester, and one thing I share with my other Black female friends who have taught. Or who teach in academia and went to HBCUs is that the expectation for excellence is immediate, right? Like there's no mediocrity. And so that's what I expect from my students. And sometimes I'll get feedback that she's really hard and this, that, and the third. But the truth of the matter is that's the only expectation I have, right? And that is coming from a Black school. And so I think for me, that Black experience, it definitely, fills me with pride and excitement and love and joy. But what I got from my professors, it changed my life. I don't think I could ever, I can't imagine what my collegiate career would have been like having a classroom or having all white teachers. I don't even, I can't even digest that. So for me, standing before my students as a Black woman means a lot for the content that I'm teaching, and hopefully in their trajectories. And so what I bring into the classroom is the expectation of excellence, which I absolutely received at my HBCU. And it's just something that I carry, and it's not going anywhere.
Awesome. And out of curiosity, you are also a member of the Delta Sigma Theta.
You know it.
No shade, but I'm a legacy for AKA, so we're all sisters here. And I'm curious if, and then I'll, similar question to Brandi later. I'm curious if that or something else was a pivotal moment that brought you into sort of the nonprofit and philanthropy space, or was there did you always know that that was kind of the direction that you were going to end up going in, or did something in your college experience kind of lead you down that pathway? Yeah, because obviously I feel like for the Divine Nine, it often gets lost just how philanthropic
Yeah.
we are.
Yeah.
So
It
I'm just curious if that connected back to some of the work that you're doing now and kind of pushed you in that direction.
I think in part, you had to have some sort of community service, and it wasn't something that I just picked up just to apply to be part of the organization. My mom's also a Delta, and but for me, it was my college chapter, right, that made the difference for me, and sort of the larger goals and mission of Delta. Happened to just get to know some really awesome women who were in the chapter at the time, and I knew enough about Delta to know that that was going to be the women that I wanted to be affiliated with outside of the 4 years, which I think is also different. Not I think I know it's different from PWI here. Most of the young ladies who are part of sororities are just doing it for the 4 years, versus our legacy is beyond that. So and thinking about this as the lifelong commitment, it was always part of who I am. Both my parents are social workers, so the element of community was always there. Going to church and serving, and even as I got older, I did serve with my chapter in New York. We did Thanksgiving food kitchens and serving, and we have different programs that we work with young ladies. So it's always just been a part of my life, woven in different ways. And so I would say, being part of Delta Sigma Theta in undergrad was definitely a goal, but one that whose values I matched, right? I didn't have to sort of find them. It was just sort of an automatic, matching. And it wasn't something that I needed to do. It was just an addition to my life that I knew that I could add to the organization. So.
Absolutely. And Brandi, you have your Juris Doctor, and I'm curious, there's a little bit of a gap between the bachelor's and the Juris Doctor. And I'm curious, because your work is so focused on child advocacy, family advocacy, and foster care work, which ironically, my mom has her PhD in clinical psychology, and that is her bread and butter community that she works with. So since you went to Morgan, she works at Kennedy Krieger. So so I'm just curious what kind of led you down the pathway specifically into child advocacy and family advocacy, and if that was a pivotal thing that led you down the path in college, or something that you really picked up as part of your getting your education as a lawyer.
Yeah. So I think service is just embedded in who I am, and a care and concern for marginalized communities, my entire life. Has just been a part of, I am also in ministry, so I feel like it's a call, and it's just a part of who I am and who I was raised to be. But I think the pivotal moment for me is after undergrad. I had a political science undergrad and major, and you can't necessarily find work as a political scientist at a undergraduate level. So, you need to provide for yourself. I started my career as a social worker, working for a settlement house in Columbus, in the community that I grew up in, which was a poor community, crack infested. And as I saw clients come in the door, you're paying light bills, you're giving food, but you keep seeing them over and over again. And, for me, that became difficult, because it's like, how can I teach you how to fish? How can I prepare your family to be stable? And I just thought that the best way to do that was through systems reform. So I shifted my focus. I was actually in a graduate program at Ohio State in social work, because I thought I wanted to go the clinical path as well. But I shifted because I just thought that there was something wrong for systems, and decided on law school instead. While in law school I went to law school at night, but worked in the General Assembly during the day. So I was able to see how policy represented us and didn't represent us, and had some strong mentorship, in that period to where I just couldn't walk away from kids. As it relates to my law degree, though, however, I went to law school thinking, okay, I do social work. I've done social work up until this point. I want to do contracts. Give me taxes. Give me property. Give me something that does not have the drama of people. But as I kind of walked through my experience there, I recognized that I'm gifted for this work around children and families, and that some of my colleagues just really did not have an appreciation for what children and families experiences are. And so I opted to just kind of course correct and get right back in line with, what I'm purposed to do. And so for me, my experience in the legislature just showed me over and over again how absent people of color are from the discussions, how absent impacted people are as part of the discussions. And so I've stayed the course around children and families because I think that's where I can add the most value.
Absolutely. Out of curiosity, I'm curious what led you both to sort of, transition's not the right word, but decide that with your practitioner work, you also want to now teach.
Mm.
So I'm curious what kind of led you both down the pathway in your interest in sort of mentoring the next generation of both policy leaders and philanthropists, in Ebonie's case. So either of you can answer that first.
I can go. Auntie Oprah asked a question like, "Who are you at the core?" And when I heard her ask that question, I thought to myself, "Who am I at the core?" And that's a teacher. Um, my closest aunt is an educator growing up, and I was like 9, helping her grade papers, right? So to me, it just always was fun. I marveled at the way that she stood before her students, and she had such a bold voice, and caught the students' attention, and commanded the room, and she's also an orator, so teaching me how to do public speaking. And my mom ended up going into the education system as a social worker. So again, being around education and the education system, I wasn't sure what I was going to do when I left undergrad, and so I started working at MTV and BET. So I had a very corporate career, fun corporate career, doing production and shows and all that fun stuff. But when then Senator Obama was running for president, I knew that I wanted to make an impact, and it was something kept burning, itching at me, like, hey, this life's got to be better than just running shows. And so I knew that going into nonprofit was something that I wanted to do, and still having a difficult time finding my footing. I often found myself in spaces of teaching as an adjunct or doing trainings for nonprofits. And it was something I always wanted to do. Like I love teaching. I love being in the classroom. I love the creativity of it. I love the autonomy of it. And I know that as a practitioner, that is what I can bring as one of the best assets to students. Oftentimes I found myself having professors who didn't have the real world experience, and so they were teaching from a textbook. And so when I did have professors, when I went to NYU for my first graduate degree, I remember actually a professor was an old colleague of mine at MTV, and it was such real world that it hit better. And so at that moment, I knew that being able to do both was going to be important. And so even though I'm here full time at the university, I still have to have that practice as a part of my life in order for me to feel as though my teaching is impactful. So it's almost like they're not mutually exclusive for me. Like it's a package. Like I learn and then I teach and then I learn. So it's sort of it's a package deal for me, and I don't think I would feel fully whole if I wasn't doing one or the other.
Absolutely. Brandi?
I was sought out to teach, at the higher education level just because of my reputation for this work. And just being a thought leader in this space. And so the first place I taught as an adjunct in Cleveland. I was teaching some graduate classes, and something just came alive in me, just this ability to, impart this knowledge for folks that are going to take what I know even further. And so to come here at the university, and, I think the most exciting part about this opportunity, or the thing that made me move across the country to Maryland, is just building this army of children's advocate. I mean, just equipping a new generation that will carry the work of kids and families, particularly at a time where we're seeing so many of the giants and the champions that are retiring, or unfortunately passing away, or just seeking other things to invest their time because of the pandemic. Being here, and I'm particularly interested in, and I'm hopeful that through these classes we'll be able to have a more diverse set of leaders that we can prepare for this work.
Awesome. And since you perfectly segued, Ebonie, I'm curious what sort of drew you to working at SPP specifically. Did you have any goals in mind? And do you have any thoughts about how you see your role as a Black educator and the impact you hope to have inside and outside of the classroom?
So interestingly, just a couple of weeks ago, I found an email that one of my moms from church, who used to work here at the university, she knew or knows Dr. Harris, and this was back, I don't know, maybe in 13, and she'd sent a note, and Nina responded, and it just sort of kind of got lost. And Jen Littlefield also responded on that thread. Fast forward, I was actually reconnected to SPP through the Do Good Institute. And so my work with my own nonprofit, that's how I got reintroduced. So when I found that email, I had to think to myself, wow, okay, what did Dr. Bryant see? Because policy is not my background, but the topic of nonprofit leadership, development, fundraising, that is. And so that intersectionality in the work that a lot of nonprofit organizations do through their work, they may advocate, et cetera, was sort of how my path got here. And admittedly, I was a little nervous. Like even though I live in DC, policy is not my thing, lobbying, all of the things that many people move here, or come to DC for, was not me. And so I was, wondered, how do I bring value to a school that's so steeped in that? And so I'm still learning that piece. But what I have found in the two going on 3 years being here is that the presence of a Black woman is making a difference, right? The very presence of teaching a course. I teach one required course, and the other two are, or three are electives. But nonetheless, the students, even if they come from other schools, again, the first time many of them have been in a room with a Black woman as a teacher, which to me still blows my mind. As early as pre-K, my teachers were Black, high school, middle school, etc. Fun fact, 80% of teachers in the United States are white women. And knowing that, I had to think back, and even the teachers I've had, and the ones that stood out to me are the Black women, with the exception of my kindergarten and first grade teacher. But anyway, but the teachers that I still have relationships with, that I gravitated towards, were the ones that looked like me. In seminary, I was intentional about taking all the classes that the Black professors took, because I wanted to learn and understand the Bible and theology from a perspective that in some way, shape, or form, I was going to be able to connect with, right? And so that doesn't mean that there's not value in having other teachers, but I think in a dominant culture and society, we often hear from those perspectives. And so when I'm able to come into the classroom and give a different experience and a different perspective, it does far more than I expected that it would. We can teach data and numbers all day, But when it comes to the issues that impact us in this school and the things that our students are hopefully going to influence and change, it makes a difference from having folks that look like Brandi and I stand before them to be able to teach. Now, whether they're receptive of it or not in the beginning, that's a whole nother story. I can't help that. But what I can do is, again, expect that excellence and teach to the best of my ability and teach from the space that I know. And I know being a Black woman from my experience. So, yeah.
Brandi, I want to give you a chance to add anything or respond before I sort of add my little 2 cents as a former student and, uh, also echoing, just how important it is. I feel that you've been added to the faculty. So I want to give you a chance to add anything before I add my little 2 cents in.
Yeah, representation matters. And for me, I think I just hope my presence encourages other students of color to join this work, become members of this school. I don't know, I think it was kind of lost on me before I got here how significant Ebonie and my presence is in the school, and how historic it is. And so, I've always been in environments where I have been one of the only Black people demonstrating leadership of some sort. And so I didn't, I thought an environment like College Park would be more diverse. So it was kind of, surprising. But I hope my presence will show to other students that are thinking about what their future career paths might be. I hope my presence is something that encourages them to pursue public policy. And I also look at for the students of color who are already here and already studying, W.E.B. Du Bois talked about the talented 10th. And I think it's my job to develop Black leadership and model, what Black excellence looks like. And so I do hope that my experience here and being here is an example to other students, but also helps to develop them and also expand beyond a 10th. We all have a role to play in our community. And that's what I'm hopeful to accomplish while I'm here. This is my first semester, and I don't have the experience that Ebonie has just yet. I can't give a synopsis of how I've been received in the classroom, but I just hope that it brings more students to this work because now, unlike any other time, we really need leadership as it relates to systemic change and our laws and legislation.
I would say that, even if maybe your students are, coming up to you both after class and, vocalizing it, I went to the school at a time where I didn't pick a specialization because there weren't people within the specializations where I could get certain diverse perspectives. So, for example, imagine taking, an environmental policy class and never discussing environmental racism, having entire and I mean on a boat. It was a global class, but pointing out that poor communities were being more severely impacted, but never talking about the ethnic or racial implications of that. Just sort of just being like, it's a thing that's happening. And then moving on. Yeah, and then move on. Or, imagine taking an education class and never bringing up race at all. And and you're sitting there as a Black student. Wow. And, and I'm from Baltimore, born and raised. And I'm having classmates just saying like, well, why don't the schools just go buy the laptops? And I'm just like, oh yeah, you're some of the policies and not, professors not being able to make that connection that like, you're framing this argument as a poor inner city schools don't want to help their students when in fact, like the policies are actually reinforcing a negative cycle that they can't adhere if they don't have money. Like you can't expect a school to buy and get all these new laptops if they're like, don't have any money. and then you end up punishing the school, which continues the cycle. That's a problem. So there were many times I was in the classroom, and that perspective, you ended up having students of color and Black students being mini educators and being like, well, guys, like, just to add in, like, we need to have a little bit of a more nuanced discussion. Or, Brandi, for your work with foster care, like, imagine having a discussion and the health aspect and the housing aspect are not connected together, because housing policy is health policy. So it's little things like that where, or if for, Ebonie, in the philanthropy space, imagine like having a discussion and no one in the room is either from the community, knows anyone from the community, or you have someone like myself who does a lot of work in Baltimore, and I'm going up to residents and they're getting frustrated because you're asking the same questions that you asked last year, and they're wondering why they keep telling you the same problem. And it's like, why should we keep participating in philanthropic surveys when we're just telling you the same problem over and over again? It creates a disconnect between the work and the community that you're trying to impact. So I want to personally say that even if you're not having students run up to you after class and saying, thank God you're here, it definitely makes it easier so that your students don't have to end up being educators and accidentally being the authority when they're only talking also from their own personal experiences. So I definitely want to make sure you are very well appreciated, even if people aren't running up to you afterwards. Now, I do, it is, Black History Month, so I do want to ask like a couple of thought-based questions. Ebonie, in particular, a lot of your research and your work centers a lot around Black philanthropy and Black millennial philanthropy. I'm curious why that interests you in particular, and how you feel, because I know both of you are women of faith, and that has greatly influenced everything in your life. So I'm curious how you see if philanthropy has evolved with inside the Black community. Because for me, most of my philanthropy is through, the church. So I'm curious if, in philanthropy and Black millennial philanthropy, why that interests you, and sort of the connection between sort of, are we getting to a point in philanthropy where like the church is still playing the more pivotal role, or we're just trying to find additional avenues to increase community participation? So I'm curious about your thoughts on that.
Okay. Well, how much time do we have? Um, so I will try to take this in two small bites. The first part about why it interests me, I sort of move away from the term millennial because people think 12-year-olds are millennials. I'm like, no, that's not it. Like, we are whole adults. We have children and spouses and all the things, right? And so when I started this work in 2009, my peers, we were doing similar work. We were just getting started with serving on boards. A lot of my friends happened to also be part of sororities and fraternities, so we were already serving. We were not quite there on the financial piece, but I was seeing that the service and the work that was being done was not often acknowledged in the same way. And really what pulled my coat is a research report that came out, and actually Derek and I are good colleagues, but I remember when Derek Feldman came out with his millennial report, and it included philanthropy and giving, and it did not talk about Black folks at all. And I remember sending that email, like, I didn't know him, but I was like, hey, so something's missing here. And that is what pushed me to do my first research report when I was at NYU. So even though I was doing corporate communications, I focused on communicating to Black millennials for nonprofits and giving. And so because I knew that there was a difference in why we gave, what we gave, and how we gave, I just wanted to, get some, hard data on that. And so what I did find is that many of us, our first experiences with giving were rooted in the church. I found that education is the number one area that we want to contribute and give to. And equally as important as finance, it's also leadership and time. And so serving on boards, serving in ways where our expertise and leadership and thought leadership is celebrated are ways that are important for us. And so those elements, those findings have carried me through my work. And as my peers, sort of close and afar, right, as our worlds have changed, whether it's, marriage, children, etc., so have our giving areas and the way in which we can give. So now we're at a space and place where we can give more financially, but at the basis, what hasn't changed is what we want to give to, right? And so when I have conversations with largely ally organizations, and they want to diversify and get more folks of color, the idea or the word philanthropy doesn't differ from community to community. It's just how you have acknowledged philanthropy from an old white and wealthy perspective is not the same way that we have. And in fact, that word is still, foreign, right? Because we don't call what we do philanthropy. We just do what we do, right? We take care of. And I tell that to my students, like even when institutional philanthropy forgets about us and just gives us the 2%, right, of those institutional dollars to our organizations, we still take care of ourselves. We always have and we always will. And so I think that's the different piece that development practitioners in particular have to understand, is that with or without the institution of philanthropy, we're still going to take care of in our way. And so finding ways to understand that language of our giving is important. And so that's sort of how I got into it, and focusing on really my peer group and helping folks to understand how to engage us in the giving is something that was important. So that's kind of the teacher part of me, like we're giving and we're doing things. You're just not talking or having the right conversations with us. Right. And then from a church perspective, um, I ended up in ministry. God made it very clear to me one day, I want you to help save my churches, right? In particular, Black churches. So, again, I know we don't have a whole lot of time, but for many of our churches are dying. And so prior to COVID, they were dying for a number of reasons. And, in COVID, I don't say we're in a post-COVID place. I don't think we are, but now, they're dying for different reasons. And so given all of the um, stewardship, right? So when I'm talking in the faith space, I refer to philanthropy more from a stewardship perspective with our churches, is helping to teach us how to do that in a better way. My capstone work in seminary was around the very idea of Black churches stewarding better, stewarding differently, so that giving is not 95%, 99% in some churches on Sunday with offering, right? How can we get out of our own boxes and get out of our own way in bringing money into the storehouse, if you will? So there are grant opportunities, there are, crowdfunding opportunities, there are capital campaigns that we don't have to wait until, we have a building that's falling apart, so there are ways that we can steward our members. And so all of this, all of the learning that I have is now turning that back towards the church, and helping us to think differently. And so where we are as a church is, I think, is with the times, right? It's a cultural shift that many churches are taking, and so I think we are still seeing that. Whether it's the churches using Givelify to give, whether they're thinking of doing ministry and worship services differently to appeal to a different audience. So I think church is at the basis where many of us find our giving. But I think how we express it might be different, and so depending on who you are, you might give from a different place, right? But I think we, as a Black community, recognize that church is kind of the first place where we were able to see giving done. And even if it's not church, it might have, been through a mosque, as many of us also in the Muslim faith. So I think that giving, right, is something that is part of who we are as a people.
And Brandi, I want to give you a chance to also respond to that, but I want to, as you're talking, also think about, Ebony mentioned like how coming into our community and how the language is different and how we experience giving differently. And I'm curious, in a lot of your work is policy and advocacy. So I'm wondering if there's also sort of a language barrier in terms of community access and getting our community to come out or to support or to lobby. But also in your work, do you find that equity issues start arising more during policy formulation or policy implementation? Because both of you are working systematically in different spaces to sort of hopefully eventually close equity gaps. So I'm curious, Brandi, if you feel that there's also that sort of barrier, that's a similar barrier that's occurring in policy work and advocacy, and where that breakdown is more happening in the space.
Yeah, it's almost a full circle of this conversation. We were talking about as Black professors and how students that are of color might feel more willing or apt to ask questions or just feel relieved that that presence is there. I think it's similar in the policy space in that my experience has been, whether it's implementation, whether it's policy development, we aren't participating. And I think we don't feel welcome to participate because the elected officials don't look like us. They don't understand us. But it's paradoxical in that you have people making decisions about you without knowing anything about your experience and how these policies will impact you. And so for me, your question is whether there's equity issues on either side. I mean, it's both because while bills are going through committee, elected officials need to hear your voice. And then when they make it to the administrative level, where you're codifying administrative rules and law, even lesser so is there people of color participating. And actually, I think that's a place where you can have even more impact in how programs that impact folks are rolled out. And so, it's what do we need to do to get people there? I mean, certainly oftentimes committees are held in the middle of day where people have to work and people have to care for their families. And, so making just the process more accessible. In Ohio, where I come from, we did these hearings all across the state around redistricting, around drawing the legislative maps. And people of color just really struggled getting to these forums until we had to really press upon the legislature to have some evening sessions, have some Saturday sessions, because the people that are impacted are working. They can't get here. And further in Ohio, Ohio doesn't allow for electronic testimony. I mean, you can watch the hearings, but you can't participate and give any of your feedback through the hearings electronically. And so a lot of pressure and to allow just the process to be more accessible. And I think also, people are juggling a lot of things in their life and helping people understand that these things are important, these things matter. Yes, paying your light bill matters, but also voting and being civically engaged matters. Reaching out to your elected officials, all of those things matter. And I think there is a gap in our community, and we have a long way to go to make sure that people are watching and participating. Now, I will say, when we look at George Floyd and we look at all of the protests, it is now taking that same energy and shifting it to policy. The protest was important, it's significant. And now, how do we equip young people? How do we equip folks that engaged in that work to now go to where the changes happen, where solutions are built and created? And so, I think those are ways that you address equity. Get us engaged, get us registered to vote, get us holding our elected officials accountable, and helping us understand the process. They have a limit of knowledge. Without your input, they won't know how it impacts you.
Absolutely. And I think, in both of your work, you both have to sort of, you know, because there's not a lot of us, at the upper echelons of the work, you end up, being representatives of the Black community. And I don't know how we have time to answer this question, but I feel like equity work has um, become very racially coded, meaning that when someone hears of like equity, they have an image in their mind of what that means. And I'm curious because, Brandi, you've worked across both aisles, and Ebonie, I am sure you've had to code switch in spaces. And I'm curious if semantically, you, especially now, have had to make adjustments in how you get people on board to support equity work. And if you've had to stop sort of saying, oh, we're working towards equity, usually I like to call a spade, but I'm curious if you've had to adjust your speaking and teaching styles to make your message more palatable, acceptable, and get more people on board with addressing equity gaps in the spaces that you both work in.
I what drew me to the work of advocacy was the fact that every system that impacts kids, you can't name one. I challenge you to name one. Email me if you can find one that doesn't negatively impact children of color. I mean, it just, so that's what drew me to this work. And I think in my space, people are more thoughtful of the need to call out the racial disparities, make sure that policy is disaggregating data so that we know very clearly how it impacts children. But I am also from a state where the politics are super majority Republican and conservative leaning. And so for me, I think what has given me success in this work is the ability to speak from Republican values, communicate these ideas of equity in a frame that they can understand. I think another example is building champions. I don't always have to carry the whole Black community on my back. Sometimes you can find folks that can be your champion. And I'll give an example. In Ohio, we were ranked dead last for infant mortality for several years. And people of color had been, advocating and at the state house and asking for money and for years and years and years. And it fell on deaf ears until a Caucasian lady, a senator, finally heard it from one of her colleagues, a Black colleague, and said, huh, like it finally hit her, like, oh, so these Black babies are dying because of all of these reasons. She was able to champion the cause, get us across the finish line with several pieces of legislation and also some financial support to kind of help us, decrease our incidents in our state. And so, sometimes we think, I hear a lot of folks talk about how we're tired, like, why do we have to explain? And why do we have to, have this burden? I'm going to always, dig deep and go across being tired, for the sake of people in my community. But beyond that, if you can develop people that can understand and cultivate a space where within their sphere of influence, they can also get people to stand up on behalf of Black and Brown children, Black and Brown families. I mean, I think that's a way to reduce this kind of equity piece. And I think, to get some focus on, the why these policies matter and why we have to do these things for Black and Brown kids.
Ebonie?
Have I changed? Have I had to code switch? If you know me, the answer is no. I have always been authentically who I am. And my dad always says, I am not likable. I'm either lovable or not lovable. Like there's no in between. And I mean, of course, with age and sort of grace, you learn how to sort of soften where you need to. But I think when it comes to areas around equity and Blackness, that has been something that has been consistent in my life. It's worked in my favor sometimes. And sometimes it hasn't, to be quite honest. When I worked in Ohio, on the Obama campaign, it didn't go so well because I was very clear about how these young white kids were treating those in our community. There were two offices, one on the Black side of Youngstown and one on the white side of Youngstown, one that had resources and one that didn't. And when our folks came into the main office on the white side of town, they were treated a certain kind of way. And I wasn't standing for it. And so, that was well before I moved to DC, and then knowing how political and, PC certain people have to be, speaking the political language, which is probably why, me working in politics wouldn't go so well. But I think that I have not backed away from saying what needs to be said. And so, even serving on boards, I recently had to step back off of a board because their definition of, being anti-racist was, taking some trainings and, boasting numbers of folks they hired, but the pipeline to success, the equity was not there. And you're hearing this from Black staff members, but yet you're still pushing the same agenda. And so for me, code switching doesn't work really well. I do understand, and I actually have a great deal of respect for my friends and colleagues who are able to step into those more political spaces and sort of speak that language and do it really well, and sort of keeping emotions, if you will, out of it. But I am who I am, right? I'm emotionally driven. My Enneagram, is driven by that. My strength finder, all of the things constantly remind me that passion is what's behind that. And it's taken me a while, to be quite honest, to accept that, because when there's so much pushback from it, you're like, well, is something wrong with me? Should I not speak up? Should I not? But then recognizing that, using it, to my advantage, and then using it and learning and understanding it as a strength area, and knowing perhaps maybe may not be the best time. I think for me, it's more about timing and learning that piece, and learning what I have learned. I can say is that in the classroom, especially here at Maryland, is being able to present hot button issues, hot button topics, because we do have students who are both conservative and liberal and all things in between. And what I have learned is not necessarily giving my students the answers, but allowing them to talk through it themselves, to come to their own conclusions. Because what I found early on is that because of our experiences, because we are passionate about certain things, we can come into the classroom with sort of our own perspective, and students who may not agree kind of push back, but giving them space to talk through it themselves, right? They often end up in a space where you're like, I'm proud of you all for doing that, right? And so it works better with students than it does with adults, unfortunately, sometimes. But yeah, code switching doesn't really work for me. It's just not something I'm very good at. But I've definitely, I've worked on timing, if you will. That's probably more of a thing for me, is just, this may not be the best time, or maybe I won't send that email right now. Let me just wait. But when we do have that conversation, it will be good. It's going to be good when we talk, so just, finding those times, has been more, successful for me, because the code switching, I'm not good at.
Yeah. And as, a final closeout, I did want to give you the opportunity for you both to say, if there is any, either teaching, personal or professional goals that you want to accomplish while you're at SPP.
I will yield my time to Ebonie because honestly, I am so new to the organization. This is my first thing. I'm still learning my lay of the land. I mean, it took me 30 minutes to find my classroom the first time, I walked across the yard here. So, in terms of goals, I, of course, have this big goal of perhaps having this initiative become a center, become recognized across the country for the work that we do around children and families. How we uplift Karabelle Pizzigati, who was an African American woman who was an advocate strongly for children in foster care and in the education system. So for me, it's honoring her legacy, and making this bigger and better and greater. But I don't know what bigger, better, and greater looks like just yet. I need to, get a little bit of time to, really think it through. But I would love for our students to tackle big problems and find solutions. If you're a fellow and involved, you tackle a problem every year and you lobby the state legislature or Congress. Those are the moments that I've been most proud of in my career, is helping young people find their voice and participate in these systems. And so, I would like to see that happen here at the campus. And, hey, maybe research. I don't know. You tell me, Delisha, what do you think, I should do that would be meaningful? Because I'm still kind of figuring that out.
Happy to talk with you about that offline, because there's plenty of good research gaps if you want to add your 2 cents to improving those areas. Ebonie?
Same with Brandi. I mean, the 2 years that I've been teaching were virtual, so I too took me forever to find classes and things like that. I think being in person is making a huge difference. I would like to see us take this milestone moment of bringing in more Black folks into the department, and making some long-term actionable commitments that help sort of the larger space. So I'm big on industry and sector, and as I'm still learning academia, but are there places and spaces for a Blacks in Policy conference? Are there opportunities for us to have speaker series? Because I think that the school deserves to be at an equal space and footing as other policy schools or public affairs schools. I think we absolutely should be there. And to Brandi's point of helping students find their voices and knowing that they have value, I think those types of industry sector wide opportunities create network and sort of help to build the reputation of the school outside of the dominant space. So when Black folks think about policy or brown folks think about policy, they think about us because like, oh yeah, I went, I heard about that speaking series, or that conference my professor sent me to was right here on campus. So I think that I would, at least where I am now, thinking about how we can make a splash in our space to show our long-term commitment, in action by having us here, right? And so what does having us here mean? And it means doing what we do and, stretching our arms back into the community and bringing folks in. That's what I would like to see. It's still early, and I'll come back next year this time and I'll probably have a different answer, but...
Yeah, mini plug though, you both will be in different offices by this time next year, because we'll have a brand new building. So you'll have your lay and pick of the land. So you definitely have to refine certain classrooms and offices. So I'll be in a new building. I want to thank you both so much for your time and graciously lending your voice to this, and introducing yourself to potentially all past alumni who can get more excited, and we can, get alumni of color back into participation now that they know you exist. But also any incoming students now can know you exist and maybe sign up for any classes you're teaching in the fall. So I want to thank you both so much, and I know you both have class literally right after this, so have a great class and a great rest of your day.
Thank you, Delisha. See you later, Brandi. All right, bye-bye.